Okay, so we're back and we're going to talk a little bit about how we can organize our drawings and using layers and groups. There's also another way that we can do it using blocks, which are kind of special types of grouped objects, but we'll talk about those at a later time. So let's focus on layers and groups now. So if you go over here to the right-hand side where the cursor is, you can see this pie looking icon. That is our layers. If you do not see that, go up to the menu to where it says panels and make sure that the layer is checked, and that should bring that up. So click on that tab, make sure that you see this. It depends on the template that you use in that, but sometimes you'll see just the default. There'll always be a default when you open up a new drawing. But then there could be none of these additional layers, but there could be perhaps up to 5 of these different additional layers. So these are how we can organize our groups. Kind of think about it as tracing paper over the top of one another. It's very, very helpful in developing complex models. So we'll use them quite frequently. Along the top there, we have the new layer icon. That's how we can create a new layer. This next icon here is a sublayer. So if we have a layer selected, I just left-clicked on that, and we can see that we can create a new sublayer underneath it. That new sublayer pops in, and we can rename it. We'll just call it sublayer right now. So that's underneath this default layer. So we can have some nested layers, which are really helpful. We can also delete a layer. So let's go ahead and delete that layer that we just created. We can also move layers up and down in the order. So that can be helpful to organize your layers and your drawing as it's as needed. We have over here filters that we can accomplish. Here, those are all the lock layers we can select. We can select all the on layers, different ways of selecting layers. Then we also have some tools here where we can get into just changing some of the columns that we see and that sort of thing, but let's not worry about that right now. And of course, there's always the help. All right, so when we have a layer selected, we have its name, we have whether it's current, if there's a check marks here, box. If this check mark is here, this is where the layer that we're drawing on. We have a visibility here and a lock. On the current layer, those are taken away because it's assumed that it's visible and that it's unlocked so you can create new geometry. So obviously that makes logical sense. Here we have visibility. We can turn on or off a layer visible, and we can lock or unlock a layer. When we lock a layer, that means that you can't select the items on that layer, although if this is turned on, they're visible. If they're both locked and turned off, then you're not going to see it. The other thing is that you won't be able to select objects that are on invisible layers, even regardless of whether they're locked or unlocked. Next to this is the color. So we can also change the color in which those objects show as you draw them up on screen. This is probably red. I had changed it earlier as I was practicing. So we can just click that and it brings up this color selection. We can select that color. The materials are when we get into 3D modeling a little bit more, we can start to apply materials for rendering. Down at the bottom here is the scroll bar, and we can scroll across to see some additional attributes. We could also just grab this and, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Well, you can see that we can also modify how we adjust these layers and where they get put. Come on now. That's what I wanted. Okay. We can click and drag these palettes across and organize them how we want. What I was trying to show you is this. So we can drag that across and drag that bar over. When we do that, we can start to see that in addition to material, we have line types. So these are the different types of line. Default is continuous, which is a singular line, but we can also have border, center, dash, hidden, and others. For now, we stick with continuous. We'll talk into that and deal with that later when we get into annotations. Here is the print color. Again, this will default to the color that you select over here. When we get into annotation and creating layouts and that, you'll want to make sure that those get turned most likely to black, or in some rare instances, gray. Default print width also, we'll talk in quite a bit more detail when we get into layouts and technical drawings. But the default is fine for now. Okay, so those are our kind of main tools, and we can let's create some geometry. So let's I'm going to load in picture frame. I'm going to use the picture frame command to load in our Stonehenge site plan, and we'll just put that there. Got that selected. I'm going to scale it. I know it's 20 meters, so scale 2D right there. And 20, since my units I'm already in meters down at the bottom here, you can see that. Okay. All right, so we have that. Now I'm going to move this. Going to move this to 0, so keeps us handy. So now we have that. That's all been done on the default layer, because it's and we can see that down here at the bottom. So if we click down here, you can see our default layers that we have. That's the layer that it's drawing on, and we can change the layer right from here as well. For now, I want to do a couple of things before I change this. I want to show you some object properties. So the next one over this kind of rainbow circle allows us to give some object properties. With that, we can select the layer. So we could change the layer here if we wanted to. Okay. Display color, the line type. So each object has its own information that we can give it, and we can also give it its own name. So we could call this the background if we wanted to. It's telling us a type, but basically once we have that set up there, you also see that we have materials and texture mapping and decals, and we don't have to mess with that a little bit. But I wanted to show you a trick that I kind of like to use when I'm building these drawings a little bit, is to just turn down the transparency of the picture frame of that background. I find that just a nice thing to do. And so if we click on here to the material, and then we come down here, and we just look for transparency. So we can just turn that, to 50% or so. Okay. So I want to do that. And now let's create a new layer. So let's go here, create new layer. And you see it's looking for us to put in the layer name. It's going to default to the next sequential name, but we're going to call this background. Oops. I'm just clicking inside there to get it to edit. I could also have went right clicked and went to rename layer and did that edit as well. Okay. Now I want to move that down to the bottom. So I'm just going to go up here to move down and click that a couple times. Get that moved to the bottom. Now I could select and right click, and I could change the object layer here. I could do it that way. I could come down to the bottom here and I could select background and change it there, which is what I do most of the time. We could also, if we have this, as long as it's selected, we could go to the properties and go to object, make sure it's the object properties, and we could change its layer here, right? So got this on the background layer. So now if we turn it off, we're on that layer, okay? And now we can lock it and it's all set. Now we can start drawing and not have to worry about it. Okay, so let's take this layer. If you don't have another layer, create a new one. I'm just going to rename this one. We're going to call this contours. And then I know that based on my contours, I have different types of contours. I have some light ones, I have these dark ones, and I have these dashed ones that are all contours. So I'm going to create 3 sublayers. So the first one, we'll call them light, or we could call those existing. I'm going to create this one, we'll call these new. And then I'm going to create a sublayer and call those dashed. Okay, but you just noticed that it made a sublayer on my sublayer, so I can have nested sublayers, but I don't want that. So that's where this move up one parent is helpful. So now it's back underneath this parent. So if I draw contours, this parent layer, which is this one, this will control the visibility of all of them, and you can see that basically they come half shaded. If I lock it, all of them lock, right? So that's really handy for kind of keeping things, but I can also, with this plus or minus, I can hide that. So it's just helpful to keep everything organized. And I highly encourage you to always think about organizing your drawings and doing that from the very beginning. So let's draw some. So I'm going to click this here and make sure it's current. And let's draw some interpolated curves. And so these are on the light ones. I'm just going to draw. I'm not going to pay much attention. I'm using the space bar. Okay. And then I'm going to switch to these new ones. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just snapping. Okay. So and then I can go down to this dashed, and I could maybe create some layers here. All right, so I've created some geometry and they're in different layers. And so there's a couple of different things that I could do too in terms of workflow. Is if I'm drawing a layer, I know that I have, let's say, in this line here. So if I continue this line, it will have dashed components as well as other kind of components. So even though I know that these things are going to be split here, I could maybe draw all of this in kind of one set, the dashed and the non-dashed. And I'm just doing this quickly so that I don't see. Okay, so I have this on the dash layer, but obviously this is not. I could draw all my layers like that, and then I could come in here and start to pick some points on where this thing would be not dashed, right? And we could use the split tool, right? So we can type split. And I can select that object to split, and then I can use that curve, hit enter. Select objects to split. Select cutting objects. Okay. So now I have this, and I have this reference line I don't need anymore. So I can just delete that. Okay, so now I have these, though they're continuous, and there's a nice tangent in between there, so I don't have to get into a weird position like here where I tried to create them different in different instances, but now I have this weird kink right here, which I don't want. So we want these continuous. So that's an easy way. Now I just need to move this, make sure that it's on the dashed, and then these ones here, which they're showing on contours dashed, I don't want that. So I want those on contours new. Okay. And that, let's change the color so that these become a little bit more visible. So we'll change that to red. And we'll change these to blue. And you can see it if we turn those off, right? And the other ones are at black. So you can start to see how we have these things. Oh, so this is a visible layer, and I tried to turn it off. So because it's a current, so I want to make sure that if I want to turn this off, so you notice I turn off contours, all of them turn off, but I can also kind of individually come in and turn these things off. So that it gives them a lot of different flexibility about how to develop your drawings there. Okay, so that's kind of a situation there where we have put together the contours. We've used the layers to help us organize. Let's change this layer and let's go and build these. Let's call it footprint. Building footprint. And we'll make that our current layer. And let's go in here and let's start making this. So I'm going to use a rectangle. I'm going to use a 3-point rectangle. So I'm going to start here. And then if you have the ortho on and it's snapping, we can switch to that. And then I'm just going to draw this up to there. So that's why I used the 3-point is so that I could create this angled piece. So I'm going to hit the space bar, start again, choose that point, click there, and again, space bar. And the only reason I'm holding the shift key down is because I have my orthos on all the time, and I like to have it on and then just use the shift key to modify. So now we've got our building footprint. Now, wouldn't it be nice? We know that footprint is always going to be there, but perhaps we don't know exactly where the building is going to go yet. Let's say that that's not the case. So it would be nice to be able to not have to select all 3 things every time we want to move something. So what we can do is group them. So let's type group. And you see it pops up. Group, that's what we want. So it says select the objects we want to group together. There we go. Press enter when we're done. All right, so now when we click, it selects all of them. Very, very handy. And so now we have them, and we have them on the building layer. So now if we wanted to, we could move these things around. And but let's Control Z to move them back. Okay, so that's basic grouping. Okay, so one of the things that now that we have these things grouped, one of the things that we want to look at is that we can ungroup them. So we can type ungroup, pops up, and now they're back. Okay, so group. We can also remove just particular certain ones from the group. Okay, so let's say that I wanted to take this visitor center part, this one, away. We can type remove, and you can see it snaps up remove from group, and select the objects that we want to remove from the group, and we press enter. Boom. So now it selects everything but that one. Okay. We can also add objects to the group, so we can type add to group. There we go, add to group. And so we'll select that object, and we'll hit enter, and then we select the group. So now we're back in adding it to group. So those are the super handy kind of group tools. That's basic layers. We've went over layers, how to create them, how to rename them, how to make sub layers on them, their viewing controls, the lock controls that we have. We've looked at how we can change objects from one layer to another layer, using numerous different ways. And we've also looked at some of the object properties that we had. So how we can change the layer from there. We can also use the material when we have certain materials selected. We would have to have that turned selectable. So if we went into certain materials, we could make them more transparent. That comes in handy when we are drawing over, tracing over certain things. You can even make that even more so. So if you think 50 is a little too much, maybe we just want 75 or 60. Pretty simple, pretty easy to work and learn. And hopefully that gives you the basis for taking on the next part of our project, which is going to be taking some images and or contours, objects, and things that we've made here, and then exporting them to Illustrator. And we're going to do that to really kind of think and talk a little bit about diagrams. Okay.